In the square of the city, in the shadow of a steeple, my little office, I seen my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there asking, is this land made for you and me? This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking that freedom highway. Nobody living can make me turn back, 'cause this land was made for you and me. Last time. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. All right, please have a seat.
Kelly told us last time we sang that song that Woody Guthrie wrote that he got sick and tired of hearing God Bless America on the radio. And so he wrote this one, and it has a little different theology. But at first I read that he called it God Bless America for me, sort of to be sarcastic, and then he decided to change it to be a little less sarcastic. But boy, the message carries through the decades for sure. Well, on this weekend when we honor the dignity of work and the courage of those who have fought for the rights of workers, we pause to reflect and to call ourselves anew to the work. Here in this company of seekers, we find companions for the long and sometimes arduous struggle of faithfulness to the ideals of love and justice. We need one another. Come, let us worship together. It is my honor to invite forward Alex Schul to light our chalice this morning. Alex, besides having the world's best hair color, celebrated his 8th birthday on August 30th. And Alex, we're so grateful that you're helping us light the chalice this morning. And as Alex lights the chalice, please read in unison with me. We kindle this flame, symbol of our faith, for the light of truth, for the warmth of community, and the fire of love, which calls us to work for justice. Thank you, Alex, and happy birthday.
Good morning. And welcome to Valley Unitarian Universalist Congregation. My name is Barbara, and I'm honored to be the worship associate for today's service. We're so glad you're here to worship with us on this Labor Day weekend. Wherever you are on your life's journey, we bid you welcome. We bid you welcome to this circle of love and community, to this sacred place. Join us in keeping our hearts in a holy place and reveling in this single beautiful day. Join us in remembering that as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to work for justice and hold fast the interdependent web of human life. Well, all life. We are always delighted to welcome guests. And while it is entirely voluntary, if you would stand now as you're able so that we can welcome you, we'd love that. We hope you will return again to worship with us, as each service is unique and special. We also invite you to join us for our coffee hour immediately following the service. Grab a beverage and a snack and look for the welcome circle that will form at the back of the sanctuary. And if you need a listening ear, our pastoral care associate, Carl, I was told he was going to be late, although I don't know about some sports thing happening. It was just like, oh. Carl will be available to chat with you in private on your right at the front of the sanctuary after the service. Also on your right is a quiet room for use during the service for kids or adults, anybody needing time out. It's soundproofed and has a speaker so you won't miss anything. Well, today, Reverend Andy will be honoring Labor Day, and his sermon is about the power of collective bargaining in making sure we're safe at work. And my father worked in an office in downtown Minneapolis, and one year negotiations with the Warehouse Workers Union broke down, and a strike was called. My father, along with other office workers, was allowed to cross the strike line and continue working, including filling orders in the warehouse. There were rumors that strikers would retaliate by putting sugar in the gas tanks of their cars. But I don't think that kind of vandalism ever happened, at least not to our car. I was just a kid at the time, but I remember how conflicted my father was about the strike because it changed his relationship with people he had worked with for many years and whom he considered friends. Suddenly, they were on different sides of a battle, and their environment was thick with the tension and fear. Of course, I soaked up his negative attitude about unions until I learned about the history of the labor movement in college. 1936 was a wild year for union organizing. There were sit-down strikes in major cities against GM's dangerous and deplorable working conditions that were largely unsuccessful. But that all changed in Flint, Michigan, where a sit-down strike that began on December 30th, 1936, ended successfully on February 11th, 1937, because GM was forced to adhere to collective bargaining laws. Those 44 days were unprecedented in American labor history. And after reading about the Flint sit-down strike, I visited my friend Kathy and her family who lived there. So of course I asked if they knew about the strike. And her husband, who worked as a welder at the Buick plant and was a union member, was just super excited and took us to the site. He told me the strikers were extremely well organized and had prepared for a long haul. They created a schedule of jobs, including cleaning, defense, exercise, and even entertainment. Outside supporters, most of whom were women, brought them food and supplies. They could not have achieved their success without the determined support of these outside supporters. We walked the route they had walked so many years before, and I was moved by the energy. You can't believe I'm not crying, right? They met at the same place every day and walked together to drop off the supplies because it was too dangerous for any one of them to go alone. I've often thought about their bravery. It's Michigan and the coldest time of the year. There were men with guns watching their every move, and the very lives of the men, their men, were at stake inside because of threats to call in the National Guard. One night, in an effort to starve out the men, police stationed themselves around the building, armed with guns and tear gas. When the women arrived, they had to pass the food through the windows because the door had been blocked. One woman, Mary Heaton Vorse, described the scene. Nothing was going to stop us getting food to our men. The first shot crashed through the air. The police were firing point blank into the crowd that included women and children. Union sympathizers were retaliating with the only means of defense they had: stones, lumps of coal, steel hinges, and even milk bottles. That and their courage were their only weapons, yet they held their ground. End quote. Today, only a historical plaque that briefly summarizes the strike remains. Even the building has been razed. Even though I've never worked in a unionized industry, I'm indebted to union workers for the sacrifices they made for the improvement of working conditions in all workplaces. Thank you. Blessed be.
Please rise in body or spirit. We will sing again number 23 in the gray hymnal. Words are up here. Bring many names. Bring many names, beautiful and good, celebrate in parable and story, holiness and glory, living, loving God. Hail and Hosanna, bring many names, strong Mother God, murky night and day, planning all the wonders of creation, setting each equation, genius at play. Hail and Hosanna, strong Mother God, warm Father God, hugging every child, feeling all the strains of human living, caring and forgiving till we're reconciled. Hail and Hosanna, warm Father God, old aching God, gray with endless care, calmly piercing evils through disguises, glad of new surprises, wiser than despair. Hail and Hosanna, warm aching God, young growing God, eager still to know, willing to be changed by what you've started, quick to be delighted, singing as you go. Hail and Hosanna, young growing God, great living God, never fully known, joyful darkness far beyond our seeing, closer yet than breathing, everlasting home. Hail and Hosanna, great living God.
This morning, while your pledge payments go as they always do to fund the mission of this congregation, the plate offering goes to our partners at Paz de Cristo. Paz de Cristo is an outreach with which this congregation has had a long relationship. They provide food and a lot of other assistance to our neighbors who are in need. And so as the ushers prepare to receive this morning's offering, please encourage you to give generously in support of this fantastic organization. Thanks for all you do. We have some desperados out there. I saw you singing along. Yeah. Well, since the kids are out enjoying some time in the water, as they do every Labor Day Sunday, I thought for this time for all ages, I would share a story with you that has to do with labor. Labor intersects a lot of other causes. It intersects gender, as unfortunately today we still have to advocate for equal pay for women. It intersects LGBTQ plus work, as we have to advocate for folks having not being fired for their sexual identity, their gender identity. And it intersects with immigration. This is a story about that intersection with immigration that reminds us that working for comprehensive immigration reform, including expanding the worker visa program, is a labor effort and is necessary to protect the worth and dignity of our immigrant siblings. The story is in the words of Guadalupe Navarro Hernandez, who's a returned migrant and a former farm worker. She says, "I migrated to the United States 3 times. The first time I was 12, the second time I was 23, and the last time was not long ago. I migrated to the U.S. because I couldn't find a job here in Mexico, and because the little money that my family earned was not enough to support my children or to pay for our most pressing needs. Leaving my family," she says, "was very painful, but I wanted to be able to provide for them. I wanted the American dream. The first time I migrated, I rode the bestia, or the train, in order to reach the northern border. Once I arrived to the United States, I found a job working in the fields of Washington State, picking apples, peaches, cherries, asparagus, squash, and cucumber. I worked hard even during the winter. Sometimes I went hungry because I didn't have enough money for food, much less to send my family in Mexico. I wasn't able to get help because I was undocumented. I was always hiding. The working conditions were not good and the wages were low, but I had to put up with it because I didn't have papers. The second time I lived in the United States, I worked in California in a restaurant. I worked from noon until 2 or 3 in the morning. In addition to that job, I worked 5 hours at a fast food restaurant. The last time," she says, "I came to the United States, I lived in California, where I worked as a farm worker. This time I worked with lots of workers from China and Vietnam. We picked celery and some Asian crops. We started working at 6 in the morning, and our workday was over 12 to 14 hours later. When I started the job, we were paid $5.25 an hour. By my 3rd year, I was earning $6 per hour. The workers who had papers were getting $12 to $16 per hour. The working conditions were also bad. We were given only 30 minutes to eat lunch. We had to work under the heat, and we were not given water breaks. The grower watched us with his binoculars from the top of a building. I put up with these conditions for my children. I have 5 children, and I needed to send them money so that they could go to school. In order to go to the U.S., I had to cross the desert. I walked for 10 days. My group started with 45 people, 15 who were women, but at the end, only 17 of us made it, and only 3 women. When I was walking in the desert, we had nothing to drink. The water we had managed to bring with us was boiling hot. We had no food. We didn't eat for 4 days. During my journey, my legs really hurt. My feet had wounds. My body was full of thorns from when we had to crawl under fences. I had several cuts. It was very hot. We usually walked at night and rested during the day. I think that the dangers of the journey are worse now than they used to be. She's right about that. Migrating to the United States is like looking for your death. People are victims of violence at the border. Jobs are scarce in the United States. Our people humiliate themselves in order to work a few hours at any price. Undocumented people in the United States live like they have no rights. That's why I hope that they pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Undocumented people make up, we don't really know how much of the American workforce. In certain parts of the country, they make up a vast number of the American workforce. And so, when we're doing work on immigration, we're on comprehensive immigration reform, we're also doing work around gender. We're doing work around labor, and it's all really important. So it means something to keep our attention focused on that work, I think. We're going to sing now a song called Healing Rain that Kelly and I sing together now and again, thinking of people who cross the border, that healing rain will come to them.
We know in the desert we really need the rain. We invite you to sing with us as the song goes on. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. The healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Healing rain is falling down. The healing rain is falling down. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.
We pray for healing rain for our land, that rain might fall here in Arizona, where in the midst of a dry monsoon season we desperately need it. For the 9,898 Americans killed so far this year by gun violence, 292 this past week, including the 7 killed yesterday in Odessa, Texas. We pray for healing rain. For our country, still reeling from the effects of our embrace of slavery that began 400 years ago, may we find a way forward together that finally honors both the pain of people of color oppressed in our country and the beauty of a diversity in which all people are empowered and enfranchised. For our country, we pray for healing rain. In our congregation, as sometimes happens, this seems to be a season of illness for many, loss for a number of us. We pray for healing rain for all those who are struggling with illness and with loss of ones dear to them. May beauty be ours and the dignity of good and meaningful work, and time to rest and recover between hours of labor, we pray. Amen.
Come all you coal miners, wherever you may be, and listen to a story that I relate to thee. My name is nothing extreme, the truth to you I'll tell. I am a coal miner's wife. I'm sure I wish you well. Coal mining is the most dangerous work in our land today, with plenty of dirty slaving work and very little pay. Coal miner, won't you stand up and open your eyes to see what the dirty capitalist systems doing to you and me. They take your very life's blood. They take our children's lives. They take take fathers away from children and husbands away from wives. Coal miner, won't you organize wherever you may be and make this land of freedom for workers like you and me. Dear miner, they will enslave you till you can't work no more. And what'll you get for your living but $1 in the company store? A tumble-down shack to live in, snow and rain pours in the top. You have to pay the company rent. You're paying, it never stops. I am a coal miner's wife. I'm sure I wish you well. Let's sink this capitalist system in the darkest pits of hell.
Thank you, Kelly. No, Abigail Washburn didn't do any better than that. If you haven't heard of Abigail Washburn, she's an incredible banjo player, which makes her a good person just right off the bat. She has a real sensibility for having grown up in Kentucky, having been a UU at various parts of her life, actually. Just an incredible sensibility for social justice and the power of people organized. So, again, thanks, Kelly, for bringing that to us, and encourage you to look up Abigail Washburn. I've been thinking about this analogy as part of a vow renewal ceremony that we did here yesterday. They say that the beauty of two people dancing isn't only in the movements of the dancers. There's something about the space between the dancers, how it's maintained, how it changes carefully and with intention as the music progresses, that lends beauty to the dancing, that actually makes the art of the dance possible. I'm no dancer, as you may have seen on display at various parties here. But I'm told that maintaining the proper space between the dancers takes practice and careful attention. We celebrate American labor this weekend, but I think in large part we celebrate the all-important spaces between labor, between working hours. People struggled and risked their lives to win 8-hour work days and weekends and paid holidays, not just because they were excited about those 8 hours of work, but because the spaces between were required for a productive life. The motto was 8 hours of work, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of sleep. I could go for that. I personally think picnics and pool parties are just the right way to celebrate Labor Day, because I think that's what it's about. Recreation, recreation, especially when we remember why we're doing it. In the Unitarian Universalist theological tradition, which springs historically from Judaism and Christianity, God was the first labor organizer. Now, you know the story. God's people were in slavery in Egypt. They were forced to work night and day making bricks for the massive Egyptian empire, which never stopped conquering and therefore never stopped building. The Israelite population grew, and Pharaoh got worried about these immigrant people taking over Egypt, becoming a voting bloc, taking Egyptian jobs. So, I don't know. I figure probably. So he made it harder and harder on them to do what he commanded them to do. He even took away brick-making ingredients to slow down their work, to make them less productive and less healthy, to work them longer. Finally, God intervened. God led the people out of Egypt, soldiers hot on their tails, and into the desert where God gave them a set of commandments, or God made a covenant with them, and they made a covenant amongst themselves with God. It's one of the most important covenants, the Mosaic covenant in the Hebrew Bible. The Ten Commandments is part of it. Among those commandments was, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, because you were forced to work long hours in Egypt. One of God's first acts after liberation was to make a covenant with the people that created a space between their hours of work, not just for them, but for the migrants who were in their employ, even for their animals. Remember the Sabbath. Sabbath is still key to Jewish life. It offers an alternative to Pharaoh's drive to produce. An alternative to the hyper-capitalism that dehumanizes and uses people up today. Sabbath living is a way of life that honors the whole human being. That old story from Exodus has a lot to do with the Unitarian Universalist principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We live in a world in which we're often treated as cogs in a great big machine, and I think we're often thought of in that way by our leaders. I read an article last week about the coming economic downturn, which the day after a boom, there's a coming economic downturn. The coming economic downturn that could be just around the corner. And it's said that the only thing that will save us from this economic downturn is for us to do two things. To have more confidence in the economy, and to spend, to go out and spend those dollars. It reminded me of the days after 9/11 when the president told us that the most patriotic thing we could do is go to the mall. But none of that is new. It's the old Pharaoh mindset. And it's as rampant in our time as it was thousands of years ago. People with power, usually in the form of a lot of money, mercilessly using up people's bodies and minds for their own profit. And it seems the experiment is how far workers can be pushed and how little they can be paid for their efforts, especially vulnerable people like migrants. I like to cast the blame way out there, as I like to do with every problem, not on myself. But maybe we're all in danger of becoming Pharaoh to somebody. Sports analogy alert, sorry. I was reminded of that this past week as the quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, Andrew Luck, announced his retirement. The Indianapolis Colts are a football team. That's the oblong ball, the brown one. Andrew Luck announced his retirement. He's 29 years old, and throughout his career, he's been plagued with injuries. Now, we Colts fans, the day he comes back, we have these visions of greatness. And he provided moments of greatness as a quarterback, but he was so often hurt, in part because the big uglies who were supposed to protect him didn't do a very good job of it. So for the sake of his body and mind, he announced that he was leaving the game. The announcement came out during a preseason game, as the Colts were losing yet again. And as Andrew Luck left the field, he was booed by a whole bunch of fans, thousands. People on social media called him a coward for leaving the game. There's been an outcry since then from fans and pundits supporting Andrew Luck, including John Pavlovitz, who wrote this in response to some people calling Andrew Luck a coward for leaving. He said, "There's nothing cowardly about being able to be around for your wife and kids and family for the next 50 years. There's nothing cowardly about preserving your brain and your knees and your bones so that you can fully participate in life. There's nothing cowardly about choosing mental health above the applause of complete strangers. There's nothing cowardly about declaring yourself worth more than the money to be made. In a time when money is everything and when we lament the unabated greed of athletes, Andrew Luck is doing something important. He's declaring his humanity to be of greatest value, that who he is off the field matters more than the guy who wears the uniform. He is directly resisting the antiquated real men fight through pain mythology that has pressured far too many sons to sacrifice their bodies and brains on the altar of false manhood." A couple more sentences from Pavlovitz. "In the prime of his career and earning potential, and in the moment where the spotlight is the brightest and the accolades are endless, Andrew Luck is taking his body and brain and what's left of his health and he's going home. Good for him." End quote. Rich or poor, athlete or farm worker, there's this pressure to make a profit at all costs, even at the cost of a person's health. And some people aren't fortunate enough to be able to leave their jobs at 29 years old after some years of backbreaking labor. We need room, though, all of us, no matter what we do, to recover from work, to enjoy the fruits of our labors. Of course, one of the ways workers can overcome treatment as pieces of equipment is to bargain collectively. Unions have historically been the vehicle for that, and they've made incredible strides over the years. How many of you have seen a union accomplishments meme on social media? Yeah? All right. Good. Good. It's something like, if you're enjoying this weekend, thank labor unions. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act was ratified that prohibited unequal pay on the basis of gender. And in 2009, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act that restored women's rights to sue for equal pay. In 1970, the Occupational Safety and Health Act was passed that protected workers in dangerous settings, including me, when I worked in a steel factory for a while. There were OSHA sheets everywhere. This is what you're supposed to do with this chemical or this type of steel, and this is what you can't do. There's a long history of labor fighting for civil rights, protesting segregation, and fighting for the rights of immigrant and LGBTQ plus workers, the idea of a weekend or a 40-hour work week, and the idea of retirement. Those are just some of the victories won through collective bargaining. People in covenant, workers in covenant with each other, banding together to amplify their voices as they fight for basic rights. But as a society, I think we've gone to sleep a little bit on labor. We can't keep up forever the tensions of protest. So when we gain some ground, we relax a little. It's a human tendency. We claim a little ground and we relax. Organizing suddenly didn't have the urgency it once did. Some even started to see unions as the problem, and it wasn't just politicians who were saying that. Just about everybody I knew, when I was a kid, worked a union job. We were a UAW family. We were teetering on the precipice at the end of a golden age of labor, though we didn't understand that, I don't think. My grandparents' jobs on the assembly line paid enough that they had a house with a finished basement and a great big yard, an RV. They had some cattle and a pig now and then and a horse every once in a while and a big yellow Cadillac. Now, none of my family had been to college, but they didn't need to go to college, to make a living. They could have used the classes. We all could have used the liberal arts education. But to make money, they didn't have to have a 4-year degree. My dad was a union steward for the UAW for a few years. He had gone on strike with his coworkers when I was a kid. He'd been a proud union guy for a long time. But there was another side to the union that he discovered as a steward. He felt he was spending as much time defending people who just didn't want to work, who were always late, or who would work for a while and then quit when they thought they had enough money, who were abusing the system, as he did standing up for fair treatment for everybody else. And after a while, he was frustrated with that. Politicians who believe in giving breaks to business owners have used that side of union work to paint collective bargaining as evil, as socialist, even communist activity. They've passed laws like right-to-work laws, which are designed in part to bust unions by not allowing closed shops and mandatory union dues payments. The Supreme Court just upheld that last year. Forgetting the victories of the past from which they benefited, a lot of workers took the union-busting bait and stopped paying their dues. I can't blame people who want a little extra money in their pocket, but I can blame cynical politicians who force people to pit short-term paycheck increases against long-term gains. Turns out, for all their faults, unions did matter. Since the 1960s, when unions really began to come under full-throated attack, income inequality in the United States has skyrocketed. There are basically two big schools of thought as to why that is. One school says that wages have flatlined in the last few decades because of market forces that are beyond our control. Can't do anything about it. Advances in science have advantaged educated workers, demand for workers is low, etc. No doubt there's truth there. I think there is. But it's also true that the decline of unions and of institutions in general is a big part of our American inequality story. A group of scholars from several Ivy League universities last year put out a paper that tied together the decline of unions and the growth of economic inequality. Susan Dynarski, the reporter, said this: while scholars can't pinpoint the precise mechanism at work, they speculate that unions have indirectly increased pay at firms nervous that their own employees might organize. I think of Costco. There are other ones too. Unions have also lobbied for higher minimum wages and pushed to hold down executive salaries. They've also advocated for broader access to health care, countering a key channel through which income inequality harms all of society, end quote. Surely, in 2019, we can declare the assumptions of trickle-down economics to be false. The idea that if we just let business owners operate unregulated, the wealth that they accrue will be shared with the workers. I think we've proven that untrue over the last 40 years. If you don't think so, I want to talk to you. You know something I don't. It's a theory that doesn't take seriously, I think, the eternal presence of greed and self-justification in the human spirit. The wealthy must, and you know what? If I was wealthy, I wonder if I would too, be required or forced in some ways to share more widely. And one of the ways to do that is for workers to gather in covenant, to bargain. That's one way of putting on the pressure. And I think it's the reason that unions have been intentionally weakened over the last several decades. We will never, in our lifetimes, arrive at the promised land of justly paid workers and CEOs all willing to lower their income in favor of paying their employees better. And I'm sorry to say that the tension between workers and their bosses will never go away either. Our job then is to remain vigilant, to watch for anti-labor legislation in our state and speak out against it, even if it doesn't directly affect us. If we're business owners, I think it requires us to think carefully about what it means as an employer to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And maybe It would lead us to donate to organizations doing the work like Indalon, the National Day Laborers Organizing Network, or the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida who are fighting to get companies like Wendy's to pay fair prices for the vegetables that they cultivate. We cannot stay asleep on labor without killing big sectors of our economy and hurting ourselves as well as the folks who are working. The need for ongoing attention to labor work is demonstrated in the story of California's 1975 Agricultural Labor Relations Act. In the beginning, and still today, it was praised as the most pro-labor law in the United States. As one journalist reported last month, the law grants farm workers the right to unionize, sets up procedures for speedy elections, allows union organizers to access growers' fields, and provides remedies for workers who are unjustly fired or penalized, including back pay. It was revolutionary. It was really effective 40 years ago when it was passed, for about a decade. But people seem to have gotten comfortable, and they went into the fields less to organize the farmers and to educate them about their rights. And now the law is barely known by the many migrant and other workers on farms in California. People in charge of administering the law are questioning whether it can even be revived. But it isn't just farm workers who need better working conditions. The person who pieces together a living teaching a few adjunct university classes seems to me needs the right to bargain collectively for their pay. And the people who work in service jobs like hotel attendants and restaurant employees deserve to unionize for their benefits. Like all justice work, we're called to be faithful for the long haul, to keep our eyes on the target of greater equality and our hands and feet working toward it with the people who are most directly affected. Worker rights efforts are really about making room for the whole human being, seeing people other than just as pieces of machinery, liberating people from lives devoid of time to create meaning and enjoy the love of friends and families. So let this Labor Day be a Sabbath for us, reminding us of the importance of good and meaningful work and of the necessity of the spaces in between. Amen.
So on this Labor Day, I wanted to thank some people that are often behind the scenes. Some of these are paid people, and some of these are volunteers. But first of all, the tech booth with today, we have Blake and Jim and Darcy. I was telling someone this morning, 5 years ago, I didn't have to worry about slides, and we didn't have the tech booth mission creep in our jobs. But anyway, there's a lot that goes on to make our services work well, and that is people working. Ken St. John redid the chairs before we came in this Sunday. Regina's often helping Sue and others with food back there. This is labor, folks. And of course, we really appreciate, he makes us look so good, and you all sound even better. David Barry on the piano. And there's many, many others that, I'm sure I'm not naming, but I just want you to be aware that sometimes Andy and I get more of the attention, but there's so many worker bees, paid and unpaid, behind the scenes that make Sunday mornings happen. And today I'm especially grateful for Barbara Metz on cello. Thank you. And now I have some friends coming up to help us sing Solidarity Forever. Some of you rehearsed this. Come on up. Some of you rehearsed this earlier today before the service. It was popularized by Pete Seeger, who sang it a lot in his concerts, but it was actually written, I think, in 1913. And Mary, did you want to add something about where this song was?
It was started by the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, the IWW, the Wobblies, and their Wobbly Hall is the very last one is still on Lakeway in Seattle. So those of us who grew up in the shadow of the Wobblies love this song.
And your part is Solidarity Forever, and it's to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And you say that, and then it's for the union makes us strong. So please rise in body or spirit. We're going to start with that chorus, and then we've got some verses. Here, I'm going to pass this. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. But what works beneath the pavement than the feeble voice of one, for the union makes us strong. Your turn. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong.
It was we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. Now we stand outcast and starving midst the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong.
Everybody, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong.
They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn, but without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, that the union makes us strong. Everyone, in our hands is placed a power
Greater than their heart and gold, greater than the armies magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever. One more time, for the union makes us. One more time.
Please join me. Though we extinguish the chalice,
Our connection to each other and this community remains. May its light guide us this week as we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, and fill our world with compassion until we meet again.
And now may life bless you and keep you. May the Spirit make its face to shine on you and be gracious unto you. May the universe pour out the fullness of its blessings on you and bring you peace. Go in peace, dear friends, and don't let them work you to death. Amen.